The topic is the United Methodist Church, and the guest is Bishop William W. Morris from the Nashville area. And of course, Bishop Morris and I'm not sure whether it's Reverend Dr. Morris, Bishop Morris, but Bishop Morris, before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to continue to talk about the United Methodist Church. And I'm sure that we've seen a number of positive things about you in the media, and one of the things that they've always talked about has to be your passion for growth and development within the church. And so let's talk about that. What do you think about some of your ideas in terms of the growth of the United Methodist Church?
Well, let me thank you again for the opportunity to come and to be a part of this program, which I think is very important, and I deeply appreciate it. Basically, I guess there are three things that I would consider to be the basics. And like in anything, I think you can build upon the basics, but there's some things that are fundamental. And once you have those things in place, then there are essentially other things that you can do. I think when we begin to look at the church, one of the critical things is education. And when I think of education, I want to talk about specifically Christian education in this regard. That is not to say that there isn't a place for education as we know it, normally, K through 12, and there are a lot of church institutions that have gone into the school business, so to speak, because they wanted the level of education to be different than they had experienced otherwise. But when I talk about Christian education, I'm really talking about learning about the faith, learning essentially who you are, learning about God, learning what it means to be a Christian. And I don't think you can basically take that for granted. And I think that has to be a learning experience, not just for children, not just for youth, but also for adults. And so it's really a total family experience of Christian education. It's an attempt and an idea basically to discuss the things that are important and to help us in terms of living life. I had a member who used to always, he would come to worship, but he never ever missed Sunday school. And he never ever missed Sunday school because he said, I can talk back in Sunday school.
Okay.
The sermon, I may not be able to question, debate, or argue, but at least in the Sunday school, I have this opportunity. And I think that's the arena. That's the arena, I think, where we begin to work out and to understand what is our faith commitment all about, and how do you employ that in regard to daily living. And this is what most folk want to know, is how to live out the Christian faith on a daily basis. I think the other thing which Jesus was quite clear on is that you save your life by losing it, that essentially we are called to lose our lives in mission for Him and to present Christ. And I think that's another fundamental thing, is to be involved in mission. And when we're talking about mission, we're talking about missions, but being involved in the whole thing of presenting Christ. Now, obviously, there is missions, which is reaching out to others in other parts of the world, but not just other parts of the world, here at home. One of the things that I think most denominations have caught a passion for has been Habitat for Humanity, which came essentially out of a Christian context and understanding of trying to provide a living facility for those persons who might not be able to do it totally on their own, but yet and still they're a part of it. It's not a freebie, because as is indicated, you have to put in what's called sweat equity to make that go, as well as be able to carry the mortgage, etc. But again, that's something which we see for the most part locally here. We see the food pantry things, we see the clothing things, but also we see mission abroad, trying to present the gospel and trying to present it in ways that can be understood, and also trying to make changes within the life of that community which will lift the level of living. Because here again, I think as we understand the gospel, we're talking about everybody having at least the necessities of life. Now, everybody can't have the luxuries of life as we know them, but everybody ought to have the basics. I mean, you ought to have some place to stay. You ought to have food. You ought to have clothing. You ought to have education. You ought to have a job. Now, you can go beyond that and do many more things that are far more elaborate, but those are things that are necessary for living life.
Basic. Those are
And so consequently, I think, again, when you start talking about the missionary enterprise, we are trying to, as we present the gospel, and we're presenting the gospel because we're doing those things in the name of Christ. That is what motivates us to do it. Otherwise, you know, we wouldn't be doing it. Because essentially when you're involved in that, there is no profit in that. Now, in many things we do a lot of things because, you know, there is a return for us. Okay. However you define that, you know, that return. Whether it's in the acquisition of property, the acquisition of more material things, or whether it's more money. But in the missionary enterprise, that's not your objective. Your objective is for people to know that God loves them and that God loves them through you. So what you're talking about is taking the vertical dimension, you know, of your relationship to God and making it horizontal, reaching out to his people and to, you know, his children. And that they may know truly that God, you know, does love them, and that's demonstrated through what you do. So again, missions is very, very important. And there's still a lot of places in the world where the level of living is far worse than the poorest person we have in the United States. I mean, there are just so many people who are refugees. And it's hard to imagine the number of refugees that are out there. We may miss a meal or two, but it's usually by choice. It isn't because we can't do any better for most of us, you know. But the people in the world, and children especially, go to bed hungry, you know, every night. And so we tend to take a lot of these things for granted, which when you go around the world, you discover you can't take them for granted. Our healthcare system may not be perfect, but it's far better than in so many places. So again, you know, we're out there in the name of Christ, and I think that's important. And then the other thing I would say is, for me, which is critical, is winning people to Jesus Christ. Better known as evangelism. Some people would say evangelization, which they talk, when they use that term, they're talking about it's a process. And many times it is a process before somebody comes to the point of accepting God in and through Jesus Christ, to the degree that they turn around their life and how they live their life. For some, it's far more dramatic, because God speaks to people through their personalities. And in some situations, God has to get their attention. And when you're talking about that, you're also talking about, for me, church growth. And it's not a matter of just numbers. To say you pastor, you know, a 10,000 member church, but each number represents a person.
Let me hear Bishop interrupt for our final commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. We're talking to Bishop Morris.